to show you that we're not dealing with a rational person. Volodymyr Zelensky has lost, past tense, gone, the ability to make rational decisions. That President Trump should not think that he's dealing with a rational actor here, that he can convince of this or that. The European Union, the NATO people should not believe that they have a rational actor that they can negotiate and discuss with. He can't do it. And I'm going to prove it to you right now. You may recall that a year ago, Viktor Orbán of Hungary went to, first of all, to Kiev and met with Zelensky. Then he went to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin. He went to several other places as well. Kind of went on a diplomatic tour there. And he came under a lot of fire for going to talking to Putin, because at that time, nobody had been willing to do that. That was during the Biden administration. He said he wanted to talk, try to bring the sides to some kind of negotiated settlement. At the time, he didn't say anything at all, even implying about what may have happened between him and Zelensky. Now then, earlier today, a video was released where he did exactly that. Check this out.
You probably remember, because I had some report to you about my conversation with Zelensky last year, July, in Kiev.
Yeah.
My mission was to help to put together a peace, or at least ceasefire. And I never said publicly anything on that. But now probably I can do. So I try to convince him that the time is not on your side. So you will lose more and more. So it's your interest to have a ceasefire and a peace. And if you allow me, I'm ready to convince not just you, but I'm ready to go to other places and to put together an agreement on saving more lives and so on. He rejected. He said that, no, you misunderstand the situation, militarily and politically. First of all, the time is on the side of Ukraine because they will win militarily. Oh, I said, oh. And then he explained the Russians are in a hopeless situation. Oh, I said. Then he said that because my argument was that Trump will come and Trump will make a peace and you will be in a deep trouble. I said, probably will, probably not. And if yes, nobody knows what the foreign policy will be. But I said, be careful. I know this president. This is different. So you are on the loser side, and time is not on your side. So it's your interest to have a peace as soon as we can. And he rejected.
And he rejected. And Gary, if you can put that chart back up on the screen again, I want to point out something. So that was in about June of last year. And if you take a look at, if you can see anyway, about 3 blocks below that red rectangle in the upper left-hand side there, you see that in the month of June, Ukraine lost an additional 114 square kilometers. The next month, July, 181 square kilometers. The next month, August, 363 square kilometers. And add on all the way up. And every month it kept just about going up until November when it was 725. And again, now it's back up. So from the time that Orbán told Zelensky, you can't win this, time is not on your side, it was bleeding out territory on the ground every day, of course, accompanied by bleeding out of his people. So everything that Orbán told him at the time was graphically displayed to him, and he just could not and would not listen. And to be able to say with a straight face at that time that you're going to win the war, that by itself shows you that, I mean, you could almost stop right there. That is delusional. And yet he believed it. And that time is not on Russia's side, he said. Even though if you just look at the manpower alone, Russia has, I don't know, depending on which category you look at, between 7 and 8 million more military-aged men from which they can draw to fight the war than the Ukraine side does. That alone tells you that Russia, which views this as an existential battle and under no circumstances is going to allow themselves to lose conventionally, can continue in a war of attrition. You will never be able to have enough men to fight, even if you were on the upper side and causing more casualties than you were suffering. But you're not. You are on the lower end of that too. So you see blatantly that Volodymyr Zelensky is not a person that can be dealt with, that Trump needs to just forget about him, folks, just straight up. That NATO needs to just forget about him, that Western Europe, Starmer, Macron, Merz, y'all need to forget about him. Merz was in Washington yesterday, and there was a comment, I didn't have time to cut it this morning, where he again reiterated that he's trying to press Trump into going back to the Biden area and give him more ammunition, more weapons, because somehow these people aren't getting it. Somehow they also think that if you just give a few more bombs and a few more bullets and a few more air defense missiles, then that'll change it. It won't. We already tried that for years when the United States gave almost everything that was asked. You can argue that they came late and that they talked about it and then did it and then they finally did it, but they did finally do it. And it was massive amounts of equipment, 10,000 total military vehicles, all different kinds. Some of our best armor, some of our best infantry fighting vehicles, air defense systems, everything, intelligence, training, you name it. We did it on top of everything that the European side did. And yet, these people either can't or refuse to acknowledge plain reality in their face, the result of it, because they're still pressing to this day to try to get Trump. But everybody needs to understand that the guy at the center, the pivot of this on the Western side is delusional. Is delusional and cannot make rational decisions. So anything that you do will be sent into a black hole. It will be thrown away and have no possible chance to reverse course on what's happening here. Everyone in the West needs to understand that you give $1 more, $1 more euro, one more plane, one more bullet, all you're doing is literally taking it out of your inventories, and you might as well just throw it in the trash. That's all it's going to do. Why would anyone want to do that? And yet, it's not just merits alone. Here is Mark Rutte talking about yesterday that they're now ramping up to try to get into a fight with Russia.
We are facing the most dangerous security environment in decades. Russia's war of aggression continues. Terrorist threats persist. We are not at war, but we are not at peace either. So we must continue to strengthen our deterrence and defense. And that means pivoting towards a full war-fighting readiness.
This is also irrational. I'm starting to wonder if Zelensky isn't the only one. If you see what the Russian side is doing, if you know how they are so far beyond us in military capacity, military experience among their troops, and most critically, their defense industrial base, because they were fighting a war, you can call it special military operation, but it was still a full-on war, and their defense industrial base is, just cranking on all cylinders, and none of that's happening on our side. And it's not going to, not to the level here. It would take the better part of a decade to actually come up to some kind of parity here, as long as no fighting happens in between. A full decade to get any kind of parity between the two sides here. And as we keep talking about, and we bring on experts to show you, economically, it's unlikely that any of these countries are going to be able to afford this huge expanse in it. And the Russians did this because they were forced to. The Ukraine side did this because they were forced to in a war. So they didn't have a choice. They didn't have any problem convincing their populations that they need to do everything to expand their military capacities and their industrial base. There is no such compulsion on the people of Great Britain, of France, of Germany, etc., to go on a war footing. And that's what you would have to do to have even a possibility within, 6, 7 years, something close to a decade, before you would have a chance to have any kind of parity between. Why do that? Why not say, all right, let's get this war off the table and stopped, so that the motivation and the impetus for the Russian side to continue with their production will deteriorate or decrease, because history always shows that once the emergency is over, the status quo will go on for a period of time, but then the country will start going, okay, well, we're not at war now, we're not fighting, so everything looks kind of stable. Let's just start putting a little bit less money in that. We're getting big stockpiles built up. We don't need to keep going down that path. Let's go back to some other positive production in their economic output that actually builds wealth, etc. And they'll start doing that just out of self-interest. But instead, you want to keep going on so that the Russian side will also keep going on in their production and capacity building. You're never going to catch up. And all you're going to do is waste a lot of money and make the chance of future conflict higher. In which case, let me be absolutely clear on this, everyone would lose if that happens. Russia would lose if they get into a full-on war with NATO, because it could all too easily go nuclear. And definitely the West would lose. Even if it stayed conventional, we would lose. And I fear that it wouldn't stay conventional, because if Russia thought, okay, well, I don't believe this Article 5 thing is going to happen. I don't believe that anybody's going to go to nuclear war. So we'll go ahead and do a conventional war against NATO. The risk there, folks, to any of our Russian friends, don't underestimate the ability of the Western side out of fear to do something the unthinkable and use a tactical nuclear weapon against Russian forces, which would be absurd. But with this kind of illusion, with what you see already, don't count on them making sane decisions in a crisis if they're losing on the conventional battlefield.